At this time, Mr. John Washington, who was in the Pentagon when Flight 77 struck our nation's nerve center, will now give remarks about that tragic day 24 years ago. Mr. Washington.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by first apologizing for those of you who've met this morning, hoping to hear a harrowing story of crawling through fire, rescuing other soldiers and members of the Army staff, but I'm not that guy. What I am here to share with you is my experience during that day and what that means to me and what it has meant to all of those who I knew that was there that day. The day started out somewhat typical and normal, but for me, if you would call trying to herd or lead 25 general officers, 10 of which were National Guard tags, 10 of which was USAR commanders, and 5 were senior staff members on the Army staff, and trying to respond to the Secretary's concerns about reserve affairs, along with the Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. During that day, we were conducting our quarterly meeting and preparing our response to the Secretary for Reserve Affairs. During that time, my deputy, GS-14, Margaret, came in and whispered in my ear that the Twin Towers in New York had been hit. At that time, the TAG of Louisiana had overheard this, and he requested to go to the Secretary's office and then try to get further information as to what was going on. We started up the corridor on the outer rim of the Pentagon, and before we got to the area where the Secretary's office existed, we ran into a cloud of smoke. I guess it's the easy way to explain it. And emerged from the smoke was an individual with a badge directing us to evacuate the building. We returned back to the Secretary's conference room, gathered the rest of the general officers, and we proceeded to exit the building. But it was not until we got along the River Rock area on the outside of the southern parking lot when we noticed the smoke coming from the building. At this time, we had no earthly idea of what had happened in the building itself, or that there was an actual emergency unfolding as we listened to the crowd as we passed by en route to Fort Myers. The most memorable thing that I recalled at that moment is when we got to the rear gate of Fort Myers and we ran into a young sergeant who had already locked down the post, and he was standing guard duty. But the look on his face when he looked up, and there stood 20-plus general officers in full-dress Class A uniforms requesting entry to the post, and his orders were to keep it locked. After reaching out to the Vice Chief Staff office, we gained entry and was taken to a maintenance bay area on Fort Myers, where we've got full information as to what was going on and what efforts. But it didn't dawn on me the severity of what we were facing until the Vice's office contacted me and gave the order or directive to get the generals back to their command, that we were going to war. At that point in time, all I could do is relay that information to the generals and do our best to get them back to transportation and get them back out to their units. I also remember trying to make our way through the traffic and through all the confusion, and at the same time being full of questions and unanswered responses to the things that we were seeing and hearing. But overall, my takeaway was from a paper that I had written and had read from others during my War College experience, when an admiral who commanded the fleet that was responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor, and as his senior officers celebrated their victory, his response to them was, "All we have done is awaken a sleeping giant." That stuck. And at that moment, when I was trying to make sense of everything that was happening, that phrase re-entered my mind. America had fallen back asleep, and now we was facing the same situation. We found out that on September 11, 2001, 4 civilian commercial jets had taken out 4 targets within the soft belly of this country. And again, we were not prepared. So from that, I remember the response of my War College class was that it was not a matter of if something else would happen in the future of this country, but when these things may happen again. That brings us to why we're really here, why we need a remembrance ceremony. We may or may not have forgotten the falling of that attack on Pearl Harbor, but we certainly should not become that sleeping giant and fall asleep and not remember those who we lost and the many civilian lives we lost on 9/11. For you, like those of us who wore the uniform that day, it's incumbent upon you to understand that the founding fathers of this country endowed us with a responsibility, an oath, a commitment that when these things happen, someone would be there to respond to the needs of our community, our states, and our nation. That, ladies and gentlemen, is you. That is all of us who have donned a uniform with the understanding that in these times of national emergencies, the first responders are not equipped and fully capable at the level that's needed to respond to mass casualty situations. And the law, the Constitution, gives that requirement to the National Guard. And ladies and gentlemen, if you had not realized that, please understand that call will always go out to the National Guard. That call is what keeps us in uniform, and that call is what inspires us to remain ready, to do what we need and be and prepared for whatever should happen next. So we have to remember. We have to remember these incidents so that, again, we don't become complacent and let that sleeping giant go back to sleep, but always remain vigilant and ready when our state or our government, our nation, calls us to arms again, because it will happen again. I thank you for this opportunity to stand before you this day. I ask God to bless each and every last one of you and to give us strength and to be ready when that time should come again. Thank you.